This week on Newsmakers, he's the 10th person to say they're running for mayor of Syracuse this year, but compared to the other 9, the Green Party's Howie Hawkins has by far the most experience seeking elective office, and should he repeat his strong citywide showing from 2 years ago, Hawkins could make a wide-open mayor's race extremely interesting. Well, hello and welcome to Newsmakers again. I'm Dan Cummings. Good to see you. You know by now that Democrat Stephanie Miner is term limited, meaning her 8 years as Syracuse mayor will end in December. So far, 7 Democrats have told their party they want the nomination to succeed Miner, and by mid-May, party leaders may endorse one of those 7, but a September Democratic primary is all but certain. The Republicans have their candidate, and there is at least one independent candidate who intends to be on the November ballot. Our guest today on Newsmakers already knows he has a ballot line. We welcome to our program today the Green Party's Howie Hawkins. Good to have you with us, Howie. If he's a familiar face, he should be. He's run for office by one count 20 times. For mayor, common council, city auditor, U.S. Senate, governor, to name a few. This year, Mr. Hawkins will put the Greens platform out there citywide again as he seeks Syracuse's highest office. Good to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Off the top, why did you choose to run for mayor this year? Some people say you'll run for any open seat because you want the Greens platform out there, but particular interest in the top job in the city this year?
Well, one purpose is to get the Green platform out there. Even when we don't win the office, we advance issues. There's a whole bunch of issues when I ran against Governor Cuomo that he was opposed to or wouldn't take a position on that are now policy, like the ban on fracking, like the $15 minimum wage. So, and we have similar things in the city. I was calling for a living wage ordinance back in the '94 when I first raised that issue. We took about a decade to get it implemented, but so that's one purpose. But this time, you know, we like advancing the issues, but we'd like to be in there. We don't, I think city government's been reactive, and we have a strategic vision for where the city ought to go, and we'd like the opportunity to put that into practice.
I want to talk about several of the specific issues, but give us an overall view, Mr. Hawkins, on where you believe you as a candidate and your party, the Greens, are distinctively different from any of the other 9 candidates.
Well, like I said, I think we have a proactive vision, not just reacting to crises, which I think is what we've seen over the last 8 years, and really since I've been in Syracuse in early, or in 1991 when I got here. Our vision, first of all, involves progressive tax reform, so the city has the resources it needs to uplift poor and working people and retain and attract middle-class people and businesses. Secondly, we've got to have equal opportunities in education, housing, employment and business, and that means desegregation. We have, you know, the most concentrated Black and Latino poverty, the 5th most concentrated white poverty of all metropolitan areas in the country. That means we're segregated by race and class. So we got to break down those barriers and be very aggressive in doing so. We need to have public utilities and infrastructure that lower the costs of living and doing business in the city. So we're talking about public power, having the city take responsibility for the sidewalks like it does the roads, so we can finally remove our snow. I mean, this has been an endless debate. Cities like Rochester, Burlington, Fairbanks, Alaska, the city just does it. And we've costed it out. It's about $7 to $10 per premise by the estimate we've seen. We need to, instead of just trying to attract businesses with tax breaks or get developers to do things with tax breaks, we need to develop particularly cooperatives, but community-owned businesses, owner-operated small businesses, worker cooperatives, where the workers get a living wage, and then whatever net is left at the end of the year, in other words, profit goes to the workers in proportion to the labor they contribute. So our working people, who tend to be low wage, can develop not just good wages, but assets, community wealth, and that's a way of uplifting our community. Police reform, and this goes back to equal employment opportunity. In 1980, 37 years ago, there was a federal consent decree where the police agreed they would try to get 10% of all ranks be Black officers. Today, 7% of all the officers, and it's not just through the ranks, are people of color. That's not even Black. And the Black population in the labor force has grown from 10% at that time to about 25%. That's unacceptable. We're 37 years later, and we still have an overwhelmingly, I think it's 93% white police force, 92% of them live outside the city. So that's another issue. And then sustainability. We need a city, and our vision is for a city that is ecologically as well as economically sustainable. So 75% of all carbon pollution comes from cities. Syracuse should be join a lot of cities that have committed themselves to 100% renewable energy. And we believe we need a public power system to do that, because then we can produce our own generation. We can finance the retrofitting of buildings for ground source heat pumps as well as solar panels or community solar, and really move along that direction.
You have listed a large number of progressive agenda items for the city of Syracuse. If you were to take one or two of those, did you say these would be the priorities for Mayor Hawkins and the Green Party in Syracuse should you be elected? What would you put at the top of your list, say for your first 100 days?
Well, you can't do it in 100 days, but a top priority going right along would be, we could call it fiscal justice. The city now gets $72 million in state revenue sharing. They call it aid and incentives to municipalities. That's 1/2 of 1% of state revenues. At the end of the 70s, the state shared 8% of state revenues. And in New York, local sales and property taxes, which tend to be regressive, contribute 15% to state programs. Those are the unfunded mandates. We are off the charts. Most other states, it's less than 1%. So I think the next mayor should get together with not just the other big cities, like the group that got the revenue sharing in the first place, Mayor Lindsay in New York, Mayor Alexander in Syracuse and so forth, and got Rockefeller to propose, Governor Rockefeller to propose revenue sharing. We can get rural towns and suburban towns. I mean, when I ran for governor talking about increasing revenue sharing, I was getting calls from Republican, conservative people in the towns and the suburbs saying, keep talking about that because we're getting squeezed. So I think we can build a coalition and make that happen. But that won't happen in the first 100 days. That'll take time, take state action. I think we should also go to the state and have a city income tax like Yonkers and New York City do. And to the extent we can get that and raise revenue, not just from city residents, but people that come to the city to work, and that's where the good jobs are. Most of the middle and upper income jobs are on University Hill and downtown. Most of those people commute in. They use city services, but they don't contribute.
You would tax the city income tax if you live or work in the city, what, 0.5%, 1%?
I did a back of the envelope calculation a few years ago and used 0.5% for the three tier, 0.5%, 1%, 1.5%, going through the income spectrum. And I got $37 million a year. Which is about the same as our property tax levy right now.
Yonkers has that now. New York City has that now.
Right. I don't know Yonkers rates. New York is around 3%, so I'm not even talking about that. And to the extent we can get these progressive tax reforms and increase our revenues, then we can implement the programs we need to. We can also relieve our property taxes, which, like everybody upstate, is among the highest in the nation. So fiscal justice, and I would say the other thing we can do right away is start enforcing equal employment opportunity, minority contracting. We need a community hiring hall so when we meet the goals for equal employment opportunity and minority hiring, people in the city can sign up there, and then contractors and city departments looking to meet their goals can go to that source and find qualified people. And that community hiring hall should also help people get their qualifications up. So I think those are the first two things.
All right, we'll take a break and come back with other issues that are on the agenda for Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for Syracuse mayor, expects to announce formally later this week. We'll be back for our discussion after this. We're back on Newsmakers. Dan Cummings here along with Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for mayor of Syracuse. If you're watching this on Sunday, April 30th, or the first few days of May online, we're going to have an announcement officially from you and the party on Thursday, right? May 4th.
Right. Yeah,
to announce your candidacy for mayor. At the top of the show, Mr. Hawkins, I talked about your showing 2 years ago. You ran citywide for auditor and got about 35% of the vote. Now, that's impressive. It was still a loss to the Democrat, but now that was a two-way race. This could be at least a four-way race in November, which would make the Green Party's standing and your own support enough to win, actually, in a four-way race. That must be something that encourages not only you, but everybody else who has voted for you over the years for other offices where maybe the odds were not as good as they are this year.
I think that's true. I mean, I get a lot of feedback from people. They keep saying, keep running. And one of these times, we're going to get you in there. And so I think that 35%, you have to go down to the fourth line now to vote green. you have to go off, most people vote their traditional party, the family, tradition of voting one party or another. But they go off the line when they know who they're voting for. So I think that 35% just doesn't reflect a two-way race, but actual pretty solid base of support. I was polling at 24% at one point in the governor's race in the city of Syracuse. So there's a lot of support out there, and I think we'll be competitive.
Talk to me a little bit more about Howie Hawkins before Syracuse, New York. You've been here since 1991, right? 26 years now. Have run for office almost annually, whether it's local or statewide office. But you didn't start living in Syracuse. You grew up in California, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it was the 1960s, and I got involved in what we called the movement with a capital M at an early age, at really age 12. I mean, I saw Reagan campaigning against fair housing in 1964, and they got a referendum and they repealed the fair housing law, which was early in we didn't get it federally until 68 after King was assassinated. And then the Democrats had the opportunity to get rid of the Dixiecrats, the segregationists in Mississippi, and seat the Freedom Democrats, and they didn't. So I'm asking myself, where's my party? I later learned John Lewis raised the same question at the March on Washington in '63. And Johnson escalated in Vietnam. I got involved in the anti-war movement. And then I went to college to avoid the draft. They got rid of the deferment. I got drafted, and I enlisted in the Marine Corps because I felt, service to country. My family, I have 3 great-great-greats that died in the Civil War. I have an uncle that fought in Burma and all the islands up to Okinawa. And, my dad was in the service. So, it's being part of contributing to your country. So I ended up, training to be a second lieutenant and telling them I didn't have the money to finish college to become a second lieutenant. I'll be an enlisted guy. And they left me on inactive reserves for my 6-year enlistment period. So in that period of in limbo, I was working construction, organizing the anti-nuclear movement, the Clamshell Alliance, and finally did go back and finish my studies, and then worked in construction for 20 years. Came here, got a job with a nonprofit organizing co-ops. The funding ran out, and I went out to UPS and have been unloading trucks the last 16 years.
Well, no, but take me back to college, Dartmouth in Hanover, New Hampshire, Ivy League. Didn't get the degree there. Ran out of money, did you say?
Well, I did everything but get a certified foreign language. Okay. I actually speak a Polynesian language, Tongan, and at first I was certified, but the guy that certified me only had an MA from Harvard. He was the Minister of Education. And a dean that didn't like my political activities gave me a hard time and said, you got to learn Spanish, on top of doing a senior fellowship while we were organizing the Seabrook occupation.
Okay. So you were active in Dartmouth, so active in other things that didn't finish the degree. Could things have been different if you got that certification or that bachelor's degree from Dartmouth?
People used to say I'd make a good professor because I like to read and I like to talk. But I don't like the academic culture. It seemed like a lot of bureaucratic backstabbing and people not being really straight with each other. And I have a hard time sitting still. I liked construction. I like physical activity. So that's why I went that direction. And
you were actively in the Clamshell Alliance anti-nuclear activity in New England during your years at Dartmouth, time there. So what brought you to Syracuse in '91?
Well, the construction collapsed in '89 in that recession, so I was logging and a tree almost rolled over me and I ruptured a disc in my back, keeping it off of me. And I needed a desk job. And I knew Ron Ehrenreich, who is the chief executive officer, I'm not sure what his formal title is, of Syracuse Cooperative Federal Credit Union. And he told me about a job between the American Friends Service Committee and the co-ops and the credit union in the city, organizing cooperatives. I applied and I got the job. So I came here for a job.
And you're a card-carrying member of the Teamsters local, and you now work at United Parcel Service.
Right.
That's your job. And politics has so far been a very active sidelight for you. Why do you stay so active year in and year out, especially with the Greens?
Well, I think we make a difference. I've seen that. The anti-Vietnam War movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-apartheid movement, the movement we've made on dealing with climate crisis right now. Where we haven't moved in this country, but I really want to see us do, is the growing inequality, the stagnation of working class wages, the stagnation in the amount of people in poverty. The inequality is unnecessary, and it's something we got to move off of. So I'm optimistic. Look at Bernie Sanders. He raised a watered-down version of what used to be standard liberalism in the 50s and 60s, and got a good response. And I think that's where most of the people in the country want to go. So I think we keep working at it, we're going to get there.
When we continue our discussion with Howie Hawkins, we'll talk about how some of the Green Party issues coincide or not with the other major party positions. of candidates running for mayor of Syracuse, and his other plans to make this campaign a successful one for mayor of Syracuse in 2017. Our conversation with Howie Hawkins continues after this. Back on Newsmakers, Dan Cummings with Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for mayor of Syracuse. He will officially be that on Thursday, the 4th of May, when he plans to make the announcement. Howie, a lot of the progressive ideas and notions that you've talked about today and that the Greens have stood for years aren't entirely dissimilar from some of the things that the Democratic Party has stood for itself. Is there ever any, and there doesn't seem to be, so let me ask you afresh in this campaign, thoughts about aligning with the Democratic Party and trying to perhaps get some of the Greens' ideas into the Democratic platform so that you could actually win City Hall with a Democrat and get some of your ideas in, or continue to stand on the Green platform? Some of these things would appeal to Democrats as well, obviously.
Right. Well, if we don't run our own campaign and put our own issues out there, the Democrats are going to take us for granted because they'll be able to take the votes for granted. When we put issues out there and they get a good response, then the Democrats say, whoa, you know, we better look at that. When I ran for mayor in 2005, public power was one of my major issues. And we were having rates really went up that year. Natural gas prices really went up. And it was really popular, caught fire. And even Joni Mahoney and Matt Driscoll, who I was running against, were saying, yeah, it looks like we ought to look into that. And we did get to the point of getting City Council to fund a study, which then the mayor tried to change into a contract with Siemens, and the study was not completed. But that's an example where you raise issues, and then, sure, our platform is not copyrighted. You know, plagiarize it, be our guest. Because it's more about getting the platform implemented than getting us, you know, a salary as a public official. We all got real jobs.
Sure. The resources I want to talk about, because you need some money to put your message out there. Do the Greens have access to enough money so that you can get your message out there this year? Well,
that's one of the things that distinguishes us from the Democratic and Republicans and their candidates, is that we won't take money from corporations. That's a principle. Our independence is not just independent line from the Democrats and Republicans, but class independence from the corporate special interests that dominate our politics. So we rely on small contributions. I raised $200,000 running for governor. Average contribution was $35. I got many more individual contributions than Andrew Cuomo did, even though he raised upwards of $35 million. So we're going to do it like Bernie Sanders did. Bernie Sanders style, although I like to say Bernie did it Howie Hawkins style, like I did and have done all along.
So the money comes in small denominations, and the campaigning is largely door to door, right?
That's right. The money will pay for literature, signs, a direct mailing, a little radio and TV advertising if we raise enough, and maybe some volunteers, a campaign manager, treasurer. But most of the work is knocking on doors by me and volunteers supporting me and talking to voters. And every time we do that, you know, we come out with a platform, here's what we're thinking, but there's always an issue out there that you find out that is really on people's minds. Like when I ran for governor, it was education, high-stakes testing, the opt-out movement, the funding, and that became one of my lead issues, to the point where I got 6 dissident local teachers unions to endorse me against the state union, which stayed out of the race.
Education is big this year, too, obviously, in the city of Syracuse. Do you have a plan to help city schools continue their progress? Because they are making some progress, despite high odds.
Yeah, but you look at the literature and you look at the experience, and unless we desegregate by race and class, we're just kidding ourselves. Where you've closed achievement gaps, the race achievement gap, which is also a class achievement gap, which is strong in the literature, is studies going back to the Coleman study in the 60s showed that's what explains the achievement gap. Until you address that, you're not going to be able to close it very much, despite, you know, adequate funding, which we need, and, you know, good teaching and all of that. We have the example of Raleigh, North Carolina, and Wake County. We had a professor at SU, Gerald Grant, compare Raleigh to Syracuse. And the subtitle of that book is called Hope and Despair in American City. The subtitle is Why There Are No Bad Schools in Raleigh. And that's because they desegregated, they used class because of some court decisions. They couldn't use race. And it brought the lower performing, tended to be lower income and minority students up, and the middle income, middle class, mostly white students didn't go down. In fact, they improved a little bit. Jefferson County around Louisville is another place where they were forced to desegregate by court decisions in the early 70s. And then there was an effort to stop that. And the people who had resisted at that time said, no, this is good. It improved our schools. So I think we've got to go to the very adjacent districts to Syracuse. The disparity between per student and property tax-based support for schooling between Syracuse and the adjacent communities are among the highest in the country.
When you say desegregation, you're talking about more metropolitan schools for Onondaga County, having everybody together, sharing student bodies and so forth?
Yeah, Jefferson County doesn't, bus people like from Skaneateles to Syracuse, but they draw lines of attendance zones that integrate lower income and middle income
throughout the county.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way to do it. And also the city's got to set an example. We've got to reduce the tracking where, kids at an early age get on either a college prep track or a vocational track. So you go over to Corcoran High School and you have mostly white middle class kids in the International Baccalaureate School in one wing of the school, and the rest of the school, mostly minority students with not that college prep curriculum. And you can mix those kids up. The woman that got Principal of the Year, Carol Burris, did that at a school downstate. It was very successful. So I think you start in the city and then you start talking to the surrounding districts. And as part of this discussion of metropolitan government, it's got to start with the schools.
All right, we're going to take a break and wrap it up when we come back with Howie Hawkins right after. Well, we only have time to thank our guest, Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for mayor of Syracuse. Good to have you with us. Good luck in the campaign. And we'll look for your announcement on Thursday, May 4th.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you. And it's good to be here.
Promise me you'll be back for appearances on this program.
I'd be happy to.
Great.
Yeah.
And of course, on a debate eventually, because there's going to be at least 4 candidates, maybe more.